Um, Hello, everybody. My name is Christina Boss Hamilton. I am a consultant, a legislative and political consultant in Sacramento. I have been a lobbyist and involved in advocacy in California specifically for over or just about 10 years, 11 years. And I practice specifically to advocate on behalf of issues that I consider righteous. And that absolutely includes housing, affordable housing, and addressing the homelessness crisis. So I'm honored to be here today and extend a warm thank you to Housing California for inviting me to speak. And it's actually it's great that they reached out to me because I was doing legislative advocacy trainings already. So in fact, it's a perfect fit for both myself and for the organization that this conference was happening and that you all wanted to talk about this as well. So that is me in the name of my firm. That is me again, my phone number, email, web link, and of course, I would love if you gave me a follow on LinkedIn or Twitter. That's my handle there for both. And so in the chat, you should be seeing the, let's see, is it posted? There's the Advocacy Resources. There should be a link to the Advocacy Resources handout, which is basically a list of all the websites and different areas where you can find certain things. Some of them are not related to this particular presentation, but they're all very helpful in terms of general advocacy in California. So I encourage you to download it and save it, and you can refer to it while we're here today. All right. So whenever I begin, I love to start with what I consider my sort of guide or motivation for why I started doing these trainings is because I believe fundamentally we need to see more real working people representing our communities in the legislature and in government. And one of my heroes is Shirley Chisholm, who was the first African-American woman elected to the Congress in 1968. A very, very different time period than now. She was a real trailblazer. And this quote, "If they don't give you a seat at the table, bring in a folding chair," is what I consider my purpose or my mission to be, is helping folks pick up and bring their folding chair so they can insert themselves into the conversations that impact them and their communities. So when we talk about California government, likely you know this already, or you heard it in 5th grade or civics classes. I don't even know if they do civics anymore, actually. But we are looking at 3 branches of government. And very quickly, Judicial Branch is comprised of the Supreme Court of California and then the lower courts, which are underneath. The job of the courts is to interpret and apply the law. So they are not lawmakers, they are law interpreters and they resolve conflicts in terms of, people having different interpretations of the intent or how a law is being implemented. So they play a very important role. The executive is obviously our governor, Gavin Newsom. The role of the executive as it pertains to advocacy, legislative advocacy, is the governor proposes a state budget in January. By January 10th, it's actually mandated by the California Constitution, and it is a proposal only. And so we have to be clear when we talk about the governor's proposal or the governor's budget, or it's sometimes referred to as the January budget. It is his goals that he then is giving to the legislature for them to either adopt or, eliminate or change however they want. That is the role of the governor, is to propose He also has the authority to veto or sign legislation that the legislature raises to him. And he also makes appointments, which is actually extremely important because, as you know, who sits in a lot of these seats makes a very big difference in terms of what policies are enacted and how things, translate in terms of our leadership and what priorities there are. So for example, we just had recently a slew of appointments. We saw a seat in the Senate opened up, which then opened up a seat in the Assembly. So Senator Holly Mitchell went to the LA County Board of Supervisors. That opened up her seat. Then we saw Assemblymember Kamlager run for the Senate. Then we saw the appointment of Assembly Member Dr. Shirley Weber was appointed to the Secretary of State position, which was historic and fantastic news. He then the prior Attorney General went to the federal, became Secretary of Health and Human Services. And so then the governor also had the appointment of Javier Becerra was the Attorney General. Oh, that's right. It's our former Assembly member from Oakland, Rob Bonta. And so as you can see, who the governor picks to be his appointment is super important. And what people don't necessarily think of is that lobbying on appointments is actually extremely common and actually a great thing to do. If you have a certain person that you feel, for example, as a champion on housing issues or homelessness issues, to lobby the governor to get your person appointed is actually super important. And then it has to get confirmed by the Senate of the California State Senate. Okay, so when we talk about the governor's office, usually folks refer to it as the Horseshoe. For those that have been to the Capitol, you've likely seen the big bacteria there. That is a big draw for the tourists and kids that come in to do tours. But that signifies that you are now in the governor's wing of the Capitol building. It's shaped like a horseshoe. That's where all his most sort of important staff and consultants are located. So you will want to get to know who are the people that advise the governor on housing and homelessness, and reach out, become familiar with them. If you know people who know who they are, those are all important people. They're very under the radar. They have a tremendous amount of power in terms of what they recommend to the governor, but you'll never really know who they are unless you go out and look for them. So when it comes to advocacy, what I'm going to basically lay out is that there's so many layers of people and organization and structure that is all part of the big picture of lobbying. It's not just the legislature. It's not just the governor. There's a whole universe of people who staff different issues, who have expertise, and you really essentially want to be winning them over as well. Great. From Chris, Jason Elliott is the key advisor in the Horseshoe on housing and homelessness. Perfect. So here's a little tip I would encourage you to do. Go follow him on Twitter, on social media. These folks are out there saying things, doing things. I like to get a sense of who people are so that when I do have the occasion to talk with them, I can start building a relationship with them, right? You sometimes will have a lot more luck first connecting with people as a human being before you start asking them to do things. And so following folks on social media is a great way to start doing that. Okay, so here's the governor's cabinet. These are all appointed positions, not elected. And they all cover the array of issue areas policy-wise. And so the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency Secretary is Lourdes Castro Ramirez. That is another person that is very important in your world of housing and homelessness. You really want to get to know her staff. request a meeting with her. There's no reason you can't. You may not get a response, but you at least try. Some of these folks are actually quite responsive. And I think, again, establishing relationships and personal connections is a fantastic way to start the process of advocating on whatever policy it is that you're trying to do. So now we get to the constitutional officers. Now, these are not appointed by the governor. These are actually elected. In the state of California, where Democrats control every state office, you are not going to see any of these people out criticizing the governor or, taking him on or trying to lead a campaign against what he's trying to do. They are generally going to be supportive of him, but they are completely separate offices. So all of these folks here, as it comes down to, again, the housing and homelessness issue, Chris, Rhonda, Pascal, great. And if you have any, who on the constitutional office side is the most sort of relevant, actually, they're probably all extremely relevant, state treasurer, attorney general. So this is actually probably all very relevant when it comes to the issues of housing and homelessness. And then we get to the legislature, which is really the bulk of what we're talking about today. So there's the upper and the lower house. The upper house is the Senate. It's basically modeled on the US Senate. Then in the lower house is the Assembly, which is modeled on the House of Representatives, and it is twice the size. So you should know that these folks have term limits of 12 years. They can serve in either or both houses. So there is less turnover now than there was in the prior 10 years or so before term limits were much more strict. It had to be, 6 years in one house and 6 years in the other. And so you had a lot more turnover of legislators. These days, you're starting to see cohorts that stay for a longer period of time. For what's most important to remember in terms of legislative offices is they have the ability, the power by the California Constitution to actually pass legislation, to appropriate state funding, and then confirm the governor's appointments. So we have to remember that these are three equal branches of government. And I'll be very honest with you, sometimes the legislature doesn't act like it's an equal branch. Again, they're all controlled by Democrats. You will never find any Democrat who is willing to be a outspoken critic of the governor. And from an advocate's perspective, I can say it is sometimes very frustrating that you don't see a lot of, what's the word? So I think there's a lot of deference to what the governor wants to do in certain issues, not all of them for sure. There's definitely been moments where they have put the kibosh on certain things, but in general, they follow the lead of the governor, except on perhaps 2 or 3 big signature actions, which is like what their priorities might be for the year. And then in terms of the funding, again, so the governor is giving them a proposed budget, and they then will start the process of going through all of the proposals through the budget subcommittees and through the main budget committee. All of those have to be voted on. Then they go to the floors of the respective houses. So again, whatever the governor wants to do in terms of funding has to be approved by the legislature. It is a very notable power that they have, that they can basically shut down any request if they wanted to. Doesn't, again, you're not going to see it too often, but it does sometimes happen. So can I ask, am I going too fast or too slow? Anybody have any feedback here? It's really hard because I can't see faces, but I just want to make sure that I am, okay, thank you very much. I just want to make sure that I am, making this as interesting as possible. So in terms of the legislature, we talk about leadership. That is known as the head of the state Senate and the head of the Assembly. So on the state Senate side, you've got the president pro tempore. She's not the actual president of the Senate, which is the lieutenant governor, but the president pro tempore is the in real life actual head of the Senate. That would be Senator Tony Atkins out of San Diego. That is a very powerful position. Most powerful positions in the legislature are the majority leaders. In the assembly, it's the speaker, which is Assembly Member Anthony Rendon. He is out of Los Angeles. So what you generally need to know about the leadership is whatever it is that you're trying to do, you really need to get them on board. At the very least, let them meet with their staff. Again, they also have staff that are assigned to different issue areas that are also experts. And you really need to start the process of building relationships. If you are serious about advocacy, and if you have an ambitious agenda that you want to see happen, you must start building long-term relationships with these people, because ultimately nothing is going, no bill is going to leave the Senate if Tony Atkins doesn't want it to. Same thing on the assembly side. So a really fast way to like go nowhere is to have them not be on board with what you're trying to do. Okay, so here, these are the links. I did insert the links, but they're listed in the Advocacy Resources document. These are the district maps. And so they will show you how the districts are cut up on the Senate and the Assembly side. Really important, look up who represents you and your constituency. Those are the most important people. I would say second to the legislative, the leadership. Your representative could be your greatest champion. Now, depends what party they belong to, what their philosophies are. However, you might luck out and have a champion on your side, like some of the legislators that have talked to you during the conference. And especially if you are a constituent, is a really big deal. And I would encourage you to really work that and basically leverage that as much as possible. So I see two questions. When does leadership change? That is an awesome question. Leadership changes when so they're voted into leadership by their respective caucuses. So the Democratic caucus on the Senate side and on the Assembly side. Leadership generally changes when the leader becomes term limited, and then the caucus, and all of this is done behind closed doors. So honestly, it's quite mysterious. I've certainly never been made privy to what the process is, but they basically lobby each other to vote for them. It's almost like a little mini election, but it's a very important election because that is what establishes who the next leader is. So you're generally talking about when people term out. However, it is possible that they could be kicked out of leadership before that happens. For example, I want to say 6 years ago, Assemblymember Chad Mays was the minority leader, and he lost that leadership position as a result of his vote on a cap and trade bill. This was during Jerry Brown's years. And as punishment, his caucus, now granted, it's not a big caucus, so it's not a huge number of people, they voted to replace him. And so he lost his position. It is totally possible for that to happen. Oh, I see here that anything other than can't see anything. Oh, okay, I hope we resolve that. All right. So we're going to our first poll. If you could pull that up for you, or for me, Gavin. Okay, so here's our first poll. Do you know who represents you in the Assembly and the Senate? This is not to shame you. This is probably anonymous, so I don't see anybody's name. This is merely to ask a very important question, because again, if you take the role of your role as an advocate seriously, you must start with the local, right? All politics is local is extremely true. So ultimately the question being, Who are the folks that represent you and your constituents? If you can answer yes or no. And in follow-up, have you ever met with them or someone in their staff, either in Sacramento or in the district offices, to discuss legislation or an issue of concern? So have you ever lobbied them, basically? Or do you even know who they are and maybe know them socially, right? Some legislators are really into local events, and maybe they own a small business. So maybe you've met with them, not regarding an issue necessarily. I just would love to get a sense of folks and what they know. Oh, okay, awesome. 75%, that's extremely impressive. And yes, about 44%. Okay, great. Well, that's telling me that a lot of folks have basically started laying these building blocks. Good job. All right, so let's go back. Really important and very under the radar for, well, put it this way, for folks who are, live and breathe the Capitol, this is not a under the radar issue. However, for voters, I think it's something that's not necessarily widely known. But right now, the California Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission, which was established by the voters, a bipartisan commission of voters from all around the state, are meeting to redraw the boundaries, the state office boundaries and the congressional boundaries. They are literally doing it as we speak, and this process happens every 10 years after the census, and it is contingent upon population. And I'm sure you may have read in the newspaper that we are losing a congressional seat, which is the first time that has ever happened. Not a good thing, but it is what it is. And so public input is really important. And I would say if you're the type of person who's cognizant of your district, who is a community leader or very active in your community, local community organizations, that you should maybe research. This is the website. They do public presentations. You can invite them to come speak if you are on, in a club of some kind. Their job right now is to take public input. And so I encourage you to get involved in that if you can, because the districts, that's really, really important, and I'll point to this. I want to say California is maybe one of 2 states in the country that even has an independent redistricting commission. Why is that important? In every other state, it is done by the majority parties in the state government. And why is that a problem? Well, you can imagine if I'm a majority party leader, I am going to draw district boundaries that are very beneficial to my incumbents to make sure that they stay in office. And so if you look in certain parts of the country where, and that's called gerrymandering has literally prevented, in some states, the minority party from ever being able to get the certain seats in Congress or on the state level. It's a really nasty thing that unfortunately exists in our system. And in fact, I think one of the fantastic things that California established that should be a model for other states, because this should not be subject to politics. It actually should, district boundaries should be in fact drawn based on the principles behind redistricting, which is keeping communities of interest together. That should be what creates the boundaries, not basically manipulating the map so that you can keep as many of your party in power as possible. Gerrymandering has had a significant effect in Congress. Many states have filed lawsuits with their courts because gerrymandering has been found to be racially biased, totally a unfair advantage to certain, again, majority leadership. and a host of civil rights issues that have come out of it. And sometimes their courts have agreed that they need to redraw them because they didn't, they basically did it in a way that completely disenfranchises voters of color and in poor neighborhoods. But they don't always agree to that, and the boundaries are allowed to stay. And so you have what I would say very lopsided leaderships in certain states where the people are really not properly represented. So that's an issue that I call attention to, simply because we're in the process right now. And I welcome questions, so please enter a question if you have one. So here's where we start. So you think you have a good idea, and I'll tell you, in my 11 years at the Capitol, I've worked with a lot of advocates representing a bunch of organizations. They are extremely intelligent and extremely well versed in the issue areas that they represent. And really, I would say all of the fundamental, like, big legislation that ultimately has passed has come from advocacy groups who year after year after year have just, beat the drum on what it is that the state needs to be doing. Has the state moved fast enough? You could argue not so much in certain ways, but from a fundamental starting point, you want to come at it before you think that introducing legislation is the thing you should be doing. You really want to take a step back and look at the landscape in general, right? All of these questions are going to have an impact on whether or not you and your organization decides to introduce legislation. So, for example, are you proposing something brand new that doesn't exist in law at all anywhere? You're essentially creating law. Are you looking to change or rescind existing law? That, I would argue, maybe a little bit easier, depends on the issue. Does the idea that you have, could you enact it through regulatory change versus legislation? Why is that important? It's so much easier to do it through regulation. You don't have to get 120 people to vote yes, and or the governor to sign a piece of paper. So you want to really investigate what it is that I'm trying to do. Is this something that I could do through regulation? And if so, let me look into what that would entail. Is this a lawsuit? Is this such an egregious issue with such serious consequences that, we should just file litigation and ask the court for an injunction against what it is that's happening? Maybe you can find a pro bono civil rights attorney, find legal representation and essentially make your case through the courts. And then finally, the main question, is it a local issue? Is it a state issue or a federal issue? That's really important, because if you introduce legislation at the state level that is trying to change something that only Congress can do, you will A, look foolish, B, not get very far, and C, likely have a really hard time getting a legislator to actually author the bill for you. So all of these things are like, let me look at all of these, what's the answer? And then I make my decision. Okay, I'm going to find a lawmaker to be my author, and we are going to introduce legislation. So once you get to that level, again, series of questions you should be asking yourself. Does the new policy cost money? Why is that important? Well, if you're trying to do something that involves significant funding, you not only will be looking at legislation going through policy committees, you will also need to go to the budget committee and subcommittees and request the money. And the reality is, if the legislature does not appropriate the money that you need, you are going to have a really hard time getting what you want. And in fact, you might want to say, okay, we want to do this big ambitious thing. It's going to require this amount of money. We're not even going to do a policy bill. We're going to focus all our advocacy efforts on the budget. And I can tell you that it is a completely different process. It's a whole different set of committees. Your timelines are different. So if you are doing this yourself, I would say become very familiar with what the process is. It's a different cast of characters when it comes to consultants. There's budget consultants versus policy consultants. So you would just really need to become knowledgeable, or at the very least, work with someone who is experienced with budget advocacy, because it really is a different animal than just introducing a policy bill. So then, here's some other really important questions. Is this politically possible? For example, let's think of, there's an earthquake and you want to change the, requirements on schools in terms of building earthquake-friendly schools, right? Just picking a random issue. It may be that what you're trying to do in this exact moment in time is going to be swimming upstream. The legislature is not there. The people of California are not there. And so you're going to have some issues getting votes, period. For example, there's a shooting at a school and you want to relax gun rules. Probably not the best time to do that. Not that I in any way think you should be doing that. But again, it's about really taking your temperature on where the winds of change are, and are you, or conversely, it might actually be very helpful, right? This is a sad thing to say, but you may have been advocating around, stricter gun laws for years, but you get traction this particular year because of a particular incident that happened. So that is part of the calculations. All of this is happening before you even approach a lawmaker to be your author, because these are the questions that they will ask you. And you need to show that you've done your due diligence, that you know what you're talking about, to inspire them to support you because they have confidence in you as an advocate. Do you have the resources you need? You need some serious staff time to lobby legislation. Do you have enough activists and volunteers who are willing to dedicate the time that it takes? You're talking about going through potentially more than one policy committee in both houses. So you're talking about two. So you're going through one house first, jumping over, through a bunch of hurdles, going to your floor vote, and then doing it again on this other side. This is probably easily, I would say, a good 8 months of full-time advocacy when you are running legislation. If it's legislation that's going to have a little bit of, problem with controversy, or you're looking for a big amount of dollars. It's not just some, I'm going to, do some law that is like, don't throw away your chewing gum, or something, much easier and much more politically possible. And then you determine, okay, I've answered all these questions. I've figured out my pros, my cons, and I'm ready. We're ready as an organization. We're going to do this. So here's what I'm talking about. This is actually a very intimidating chart. So I will break it down for you in the next slide, but this is really what we're talking about here, right? When I say a good 8 months of full-time work, these are your steps. It is not a piece of cake to introduce a bill and try to get it through. It's also a different story between saying, are you sponsoring that bill? Are you the lead organization on it, versus we'll just support it, in which case someone else is taking the lead. And as an organization, we'll submit some letters in support, and maybe we'll go testify at the committee hearing. That's also a different question too, because that's going to take a lot less time and resources. And so maybe that's where you're at, and that's what you can contribute. And that's good too. I mean, I think having a wide array of allies and partners is really important for making stuff happen and getting the votes that you need. So here's your snapshot. Sorry. Ha, that was funny. Here's your snapshot. You're going to introduce your bill in the first house, which is known as the House of Origin. You're going to go through policy committees. I had one bill triple referred. I kid you not, I had to go through 3 policy committees. Very difficult, only because you are like navigating your deadlines and you need to get these things heard and passed back to back to back to make sure that you meet the deadline for when policy committees need to finish. Then you go into your fiscal committee, which is appropriations, which is a whole other murky, we like to say, where bills go to die. It's a very not transparent process, how bills get out of appropriations. That's a subject for another day, but let's just say that's another hurdle to climb. And then of course you got your floor votes, which is means you're getting a majority or supermajority votes, depending on what it is that you're trying to do. So 2/3 vote, very hard. Majority vote, not as hard. And then you're going to do the same thing in the second house. Then you're sending it to the governor and hoping he signs it or vetoes it if you're opposing legislation. So all of these require significant amounts of work. And when your bill leaves the legislature and actually goes to the governor, that doesn't mean your work is finished. You will then shift all your efforts to him and getting him to do what you want to do. Oh, triple referred too, Chris. Oh, I'm sorry. That stinks really bad. Yeah, it's not fun. Somehow I keep getting double referrals too. Okay. So here's where you're at, right? You know the issue you're introducing. You've decided you have the resources. It's the right time to do it. Okay, great. I know the process. Who should be my author? Again, all of these are important questions. You are not going to just willy-nilly, pick Joe Schmo to be your author, and they don't even care about your issue. And they're just basically giving you their name, and they are not helping you. Actually, they may be hurting you because other legislators don't like them. These are all really important questions. You want to find a legislator that will be your champion. So we already know that there's certain champions around the housing and homelessness issue. As I said, I know that several of them have spoken to you already. There may be others who, maybe publicly they're not like super out front on a certain thing, but they still care really deeply about it. It may be, if the issue is a local issue, that it's your representative because it's their constituency, right? In that case, I would say, unless they're, going to have opposing, unless they're of a different party and have a different set of philosophies, you really might want to start there, because it actually would be kind of an insult to your representative if you ask someone else from a different part of the state to introduce legislation impacting their district. In fact, you probably wouldn't find anybody who would be willing to do that, because it would certainly be seen as a affront to them. The sponsor is you. It's the organization or organizations that own the bill. And the reason I say this is because in DC, the sponsor is the lawmaker, not the organization. They actually have a different vernacular. But for our purposes, when we refer to author and sponsor, that's what we're talking about. I'm just trying to look at the chat here. Yes, so again, deeply consider these questions. Who is my best author? For example, could I get one of the leadership to be my authors? Speaker Rendon actually has a policy informally where he does not author legislation, but Pro Tem Atkins does. Let me tell you, a bill that is authored by the Pro Tem, you can be pretty sure that you're going to get out of the Senate. Out of respect for for his colleague, it's very likely you'll get out of the Assembly. There's a certain, let's just say, winds of support or winds, at your back when you've got VIP legislators being your author. So, for example, getting the Housing Committee chair to be an author on a housing bill, fantastic thing to do. It's going to go through their committee, so you can be pretty assured that your bill is going to at least get through his committee. District representatives, again, people who are local, if it's a local issue. Who are the caucus chairs? Maybe there's a caucus that is, there's a number of caucuses that are beyond the majority and minority caucuses. There's a lot of issue and kind of other, there's the Southern California, the LA caucus, the Bay Area caucus. So there may be caucus chairs that are important because it's an issue that you then can rally the whole caucus around. That is extremely helpful and powerful to do. And again, who do you have good relationships with? Like, if you're trying to do something that's going to be controversial, you may have to call in some chips from some of these folks. Otherwise, maybe they're like, I don't want to touch it. It's too hot for me. So all of these are the considerations, right? And like I said, you don't want to ask someone who's actually not widely liked by his or her colleagues, or perhaps not held in terribly high esteem. That isn't doing yourself a service. You're actually potentially creating more hurdles to climb when you already have a lot of hurdles to climb in the first place. So then once you've identified who you want, it really is a question of making the ask. And this is actually something fundamental that all advocates should learn. This is the lobbyist in-house tip. Always be conscious when you have your conversations, your meetings, whatever, either with them or their staff, that you have to be very clear on what you're asking them to do. And why do I say that? If you're not conscious of that, if you aren't prepared, if you haven't identified who's the person that's going to make the ask, it is very common for the meeting to start. Everybody's so nervous and excited because maybe this is their first time lobbying, and the legislator is a little bit of a rock star and everyone's a little bit starstruck, and introductions go around and the legislator tells a funny story, ha ha ha, and then it's time for the meeting to be over and you never even got to the point of asking them to do something for you. So you want to be super clear before you do any of these things. What is my ask, and who's going to make the ask, and who's going to be conscious to not let formalities and these sort of like happy little things happening. Someone has to be the bad guy and say, okay, well, that's nice, but here's what we're here to talk about. So not the bad guy, but like really you're like your manager of the meeting. So if you get a meeting, don't be late. That is really, really bad. It probably will make you take a lot harder for you to get another meeting. You want to get there. You want to start promptly. You want to do quick introductions because again, you're likely getting a very, very short period of time. I like to lead with stories because stories are very impactful. In fact, research shows that if people are lectured to with facts and figures alone, they are much less likely to even remember what you said after you're done than if you connect with them emotionally first and then back it up with the facts and the figures. So this is actually true for advertising, for running for elected office. I mean, everything that starts with the story immediately, I want to say it kind of gets the attention of your listener, especially if it's something they can relate to. So here's an example. I'm meeting with legislator, Mary, whoever, Mary X. Mary X just gave birth a year ago. I want to somehow share a story of a mother of a 1-year-old baby, right? Like, how do you connect with her emotionally and with him, right? I'm saying she's a mother only to say, here's an example. Maybe your legislator, for example, lost their own house in a wildfire. You want to lead with a story of a person who lost their house in a wildfire. For the simple reason that you create the emotional connection, you are much more likely to be successful coming out of that meeting than if you just go in and you have some, fact sheet and you read from it and you say, this is the law and this is what we want to do. Okay, thank you. It's much less likely that they'll really kind of care necessarily or remember afterward, honestly. The stories are what makes the connection. Then you want to follow up with, this is what we want to do. Okay, this happened to, Sonia, and you, Mary, Assembly Member Mary, you're resonating with her because you understand what it feels like. And okay, now this is why we're introducing this law. Look, this is happening over here. It shouldn't be that way. We think this is the better way to go. The other piece is showing what you bring to the table. Like if you're, 3 kids in college, who are like passionate about something, which is great and wonderful, and in no way you should be discouraged. But if you're just, some individuals who, or maybe you're one person, I don't know, but if you're just some willy-nilly group of people who like randomly came together and said, well, we're just going to go have a meeting with our representative, we want to ask them to author our law, that representative in the back of their head is going to be like, what resources do these people have, right? Are they known? Do they know how to lobby? Do they know how to be a good advocate? If you show up as an organization with volunteers, with a big network, you've created a name for yourself locally, you have a presence, and I'm not saying a presence at the Capitol, but a presence locally. You are showing them, hey, we bring the resources and the people power. It's not just going to be you being Don Quixote. We're actually, we're bringing the tanks behind you, right? That I think is going to make a really big difference. And then again, be specific what you want them to do. So we want to do a bill. It's going to do this, and we want you to author the bill. Like you just, and the reason I say this is because, and I don't say this in a disrespectful way necessarily, but you have to remember that these lawmakers are literally meeting with people all day around a host of different issues. So they're going to be talking to you maybe about homelessness, and the next meeting is going to be about water, water policy. Like, so they're constantly shifting their attention. They're meeting with dozens and dozens of people a day. And what I would use as a rule of thumb, and again, it's going to sound bad, but I don't mean it in a bad way. Speak as though you're speaking to a kindergartner. Say, this is what the problem is. This is what will fix it. We want you to be our author. You want to be not making assumptions that they know what you want. They don't. And some of them will actually say, what do you want me to do, right? So you have to tell them, okay, this is what we want you to do. We're not just here to, tell you stories and reminisce about the old days or whatever. We are here to make the ask. And then they can say, okay, got it, right? Like, this group wants this from me. I may or may not give it to them, but now I know what they want versus I'm supposed to be guessing. And I'm not going to guess properly or be accurate because I don't know what, put it this way, if you're asking them to guess what you want, they're likely not going to guess what you actually want. All right, I see another All right, who writes the actual bill when you get to that part? Do you get to provide language? Do staff draft something, send it to you? Great question. So you absolutely get to draft it yourself. That's actually the preferred way to do it, because then you get it to do exactly what you want it to do. I would say if you're introducing legislation in January or February, you probably want to spend the fall just working on language. Get it vetted by some lawyers, by all your ally groups, right? Make sure nobody has a problem with it, because the last thing you want to do is introduce legislation and then have people come to the first policy committee and say they have a problem. So you really want to vet what your language is, then you share it with the legislator. Now, I'll tell you, the legislators sometimes may disagree with a little piece of it. They may want to change some of it. They may want to add on to it. Really depends on the case and on who the person is. That's their purview, honestly, as the author. Like, it's their name on the bill, so they may not necessarily want to do one of the things you wanted to do, but you work that out, right? You want to give yourself plenty of time to work through all of these potential problems before. So you sharing this before it gets introduced formally, you want to get all these things answered in advance. The other thing is, you don't necessarily have to draft your own language. If this is like a highly technical, complicated issue, like, some laws are really like only two people even understand what they do. And I'm not joking, like some areas of government are extremely complex. You can write in layman's terms what you're trying to do and submit it to the Leg Council, which will then translate it into legalese, basically, which is figure out what code is it, what part of the law should it be in, what section should be amended, and then what is actually like, they'll respond to you. You actually can't do this. This isn't constitutional, or you may want to do this because if you do this in this code section, it changes this in this code section. So you can ask for technical assistance if you are not able to do that yourself. So I'm looking at the chat. In terms of asking a legislator to sponsor a bill, person is required to file as a lobbyist. Oh, no, you do not have to file to be a lobbyist. Filing as a lobbyist depends on how much time and if you're being paid to do the work yourself. If you're a volunteer, you can do whatever you want. If you're being paid by the organization or some other person or whatever, if you're being paid to do that work, it depends on how much of your time. There's a certain threshold that would require you to lobby. At that point, I would say find an attorney that does FPPC and have them assist you, because again, I'm not an expert and I'm telling you what I think to be true, but these are all like, you want to make sure you're following the rules on this stuff. You could get fined and other things like that. With COVID-19, what would be the best method to develop a relationship with the legislator? Great question. Some of the legislators are starting to do in-person events and face-to-face meetings. They should be anyway. I mean, the state was open on June 15th. It would be kind of weird if they weren't. But with Zoom, I'll be honest with you, it has actually been a really great thing for advocates, because normally, unless they're in the district, it's very hard to meet with them. And if you live somewhere that you can't just drive to Sacramento, doing a Zoom meeting with them makes it way more likely that you'll get an actual meeting. And with the staff, right? Like, you are not having to like get yourself up to the Capitol. So I would say with COVID-19, all lobbying was done through Zoom or phone calls or texting. I mean, that's when it's really nice to have relationships with people, because otherwise, maybe you call them and no one calls you back. So However, now I would say it's much more likely to request, I would say you request a meeting with the legislator, you do that through their scheduler, and then you let them tell you what it is that they are, how it is that they're meeting with people. Does TA need to be requested by the legislator, or is it accessible to you? It has to come from the legislator. Yeah, because a member of the public doesn't just go to Leg Council and ask for help. They are the attorneys for the legislature, which means they work for the legislature. And so their client is the legislator. And so technically it's like the client is making the request of them, even though they're doing it with you. Okay. Second poll. Gavin, please. All right. Again, not to shame anyone, really just mostly to get a sense of where folks are at. Have you ever worked to support or oppose legislation? And ultimately, was your campaign successful? I think sometimes it's good to know, like, are folks, you know, are you starting from scratch? Like you like know you want to do something, but you're not entirely sure what. Or maybe you've been a volunteer for a long time and you actually know a lot, and you've, you know, savvy advocates, even volunteers know I should be building relationships with the legislators, especially the ones that represent me. I should go to their community coffees. I should go to their town halls. You want them to know who you are, so that when they meet you, they are not like unsure of who you are. Okay, most of folks have worked. Was the campaign successful? Oh, 57%. Well, that's awesome. That's a pretty good win rate there. I do another webinar that's called How to Build Community Power, which is basically replicating the model that I learned working in the labor movement about how to build power locally. So that then helps you be powerful at the state level. That's like a separate whole topic. So I'm just kind of skimming over that. But if you, I do these webinars, like not frequently, maybe once every month or so. So if you want to hear about future webinars, I encourage you to go to my website and sign up for my mailing list. And then you will get information about all the different events that I do, including webinars on other topics. All right. So what's the ultimate goal? Let's keep our eye on the prize here, right? We need the votes. We need 40 plus 1 in the Senate and 60 plus 1 in the Assembly. Wait, did I say that right? No, I didn't. You need 40 plus 1 in the Assembly and wait, hold on, 20 plus 1 in the Senate. Sorry. Oh my God, my brain's not working. And then there's the governor. Don't make the fatal error of like not trying to work the governor while you're doing the legislature, thinking, oh, I'll have my time when I pass out and I get sent to him. No, no, no. You're talking months in advance. You start to meet with his consultants, his people, his department heads, the agency secretary. You begin laying the groundwork for months ahead of time about who are you? Who do you represent? What it is you're trying to do, and get a sense of where they are with what you're proposing. Is this like a hell no, ain't gonna happen? Is this like, let's think about it? Is this like, oh, the governor's actually proposed this 2 years ago, and he's really interested in this, right? So you want to get a sense of a temperature check for the governor, and you need to start that process early. Again, it is all about relationships. So follow these folks on social media, request, you know, I call them meet and greets, even if you're not asking them to do anything. Hey, this is who I am. I represent this organization, and I just want to introduce myself. And, you know, ultimately the next time I come, when I am asking you to do something, you're not seeing me for the first time. That is a general rule, I would say. You don't want to make your practice in advocacy waiting until you make the ask to actually meet these people for the first time. That is a very, it's not that it's not going to happen. It's just you're setting yourself up more for failure because they don't know who you are, right? And they don't know that you're a legitimate presence and that you are coming to them with some semblance of power. Let me see here in the chat. What are your suggestions? I noticed there are not enough people with disabilities. Oh, tell me about that. Yeah, at the state capitol compared to US Capitol, showing to apply for jobs. Why don't you reach out to me, Eric, and send me an email, and I'd love to help you out with your question. That's a really great question. Okay, so most of you probably already know this stuff. This is your typical, campaign, right? You want to identify your group that's going to work on it. How are you making decisions? Do you have a leadership body of some kind? Are you going to be run through committees? It's really important to figure out how you're making decisions, right? Because sometimes in the process, you might have, 12 hours to get back to the governor's office or to the legislature. And how do you get to a decision in 12 hours? So you want to kind of have your policies internally figured out. Who is playing what role? Who is the person that's requesting the lobby visits? Who is doing your social media and your communications? Who is the person that is your lobby captain, who really is trained to lead these meetings to be as productive as possible? You want to map your timeline. Okay, if we're doing the budget, we got to make sure we get this by this, that by that, because I'm telling you, you don't meet the deadlines, you're DOA just by that. Never mind, if you have all the votes in the world, if you miss the deadline, you're going to basically not be successful. And then targets, right? So I need my votes. How am I going to get them? You want to create a simple matrix, every legislator's name, you can color code them, who's a definite yes, who's a maybe, whose job it is to reach out to them, right? You want to count your votes. You should arrive to your committees with your votes already done, meaning you've lobbied them, you've gotten commitments as best you can. It should not be, I'm showing up at a hearing and I'm just waiting to see what happens, right? That is not a good way. You want to have all this stuff, all the work happens before the hearing. And then, of course, part of it is your strategy, right? I would tell you that building alliances and coalitions wherever you can is very, very important. In fact, building alliances with that's my daughter coughing, I apologize. Find your untraditional allies. I would say the number one mistake that some advocacy groups make is they're very narrowly focused, right? Like I only, it's just me and my organization. We never partner with anybody else, or no, we've got, these group are who we partner with. That's who we like. And that's just who we're with, right? You want to think as strategically as possible. If the enemy of your enemy is your friend, find who is the friend, right? Who is it that I would never be allied with, that I might have nothing in common with, but as it pertains to this particular issue, we are 100% on the same page. Reach out to them, talk to them, ask them if they want to sign on, try to build coalitions. And then conversely, who's going to come out of the woodwork and oppose what you're trying to do? So, this is, some of this stuff should be no brainer, right? Like, oh, you got the builders over here, you got, the NIMBYs over here, the usual suspects that will try to kill everything that we do, right? A lot of it is about proactively, I would say, before you even introduce the legislation, reach out and try to come to some sort of compromise, address their concerns. I'll be honest with you, sometimes all you need to do is make a simple language change, and that group no longer cares about your bill, right? So why would you, if you have the opportunity to mitigate all of these concerns and get these people to walk away from being your opponent, you want to do that. You don't want them to be your opponent if they don't have to be. And a lot of the times, believe it or not, people don't think, oh, I should actually ask for a meeting to talk to these people. Of course you want to do that. You may hate their guts, they may hate your guts, but you know, to some degree, is there a way to figure out a resolution? And then ultimately, again, creating a power map. Where are you? Where are these other groups? You know, what is the landscape? Who's going to be, you know, a potential ally or a potential opponent? And then, you know, this stuff, again, I assume most of you are familiar with, you know, plan your ground game, right? This is not just, oh, I have the best language in the world, and of course, everyone's going to vote for it. It's like any issue advocacy campaign, you want to call your all the legislators, right? If you're a statewide organization, that's brilliant, because you can motivate your members who maybe are in different parts of the state, especially in the Central Valley or in the rural areas where it's usually Republicans or moderate Democrats. Can you find people to call them because they're constituents and they have more power, or they're more likely to be listened to? Can you do an action now that COVID is slowly, or I should say the pandemic is slowly ending? Can you do a rallies? Rallies have started happening in the Capitol. It might be a socially distanced rally or a masks rally, but still a rally. Can you do something in the district? Rallies don't have to be at the Capitol. I think in the district, so long as you're in a prominent location where you can get some earned media, would be super. And then on social media, can you know, create a hashtag, do some kind of, you know, picture campaign where people post on the governor's web or social media, or on the legislators' social media with a message. You know, everyone's posting with the same message. There's so many creative ways to do advocacy and organizing that aren't necessarily like, oh, I'm just going to go to a rally. There's a lot you can do that really is hitting them from all different directions. Messaging, I talked about that. One of the lessons I learned in the past is, don't assume everybody who is volunteering or working with you knows what the pitch is or knows what the ask is. Some people are very uncomfortable talking and they may forget. I would say you want to train everybody on an elevator pitch, because maybe, you know, you randomly wind up seeing, you know, Pro Tem Atkins on the street, the speaker. You want to grab every opportunity you can to make your case, right? Those are things people need to be prepped on and supported on becoming comfortable with doing that. It doesn't just come naturally to a lot of people. And then the one thing I didn't mention is, who are your community influencers? Do you have sports figures, reality stars, you know, Hollywood people? Are there people that have a lot of influence and status that you can ask for their help, that they can maybe be your spokesperson or whatever? All of these strategies should be pursued. And here's another little tip. Again, most people don't think to do this, but when you call or you email or you do anything with your legislator, you want to identify yourself as a constituent and as a voter. Sometimes people assume that they know, but that's not necessarily true. Here's the other thing. Make sure everyone who goes on the lobby visit with you is actually registered to vote. Why do I say that? Because when you leave, they're going to take everybody's name that was in the meeting and look up if they're a registered voter. If you're not a registered voter and you just talk for 30 minutes passionately about an issue, they may not care so much after that, right? Depends on the legislator, of course. But when you have your call-in days, you want to include that as part of your script. I'm a constituent. I'm a voter. you're saying to them, I know how this game works, and I'm letting you know that I am playing this game too, right? I live in this city. You want to personalize your face to them. Oh, this is a constituent and they care about this issue. Okay, I'm going to take this seriously. Quickly on lobbying, I think I touched on a lot of this. Delegate roles, practice. You should totally practice lobbying in advance, because again, it's not something that comes naturally to a lot of people. You want to lead with your story. So who is your storyteller? I find it very effective when you neutralize your opponent's arguments. So you basically cut them at the knees. You say, oh, you know, and I would work this into your script. You're going to hear people say blah, 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 and that's why this bill is bad. And I'll tell you why they're wrong, right? You've literally clipped their wings before they even got a chance to talk with the legislator, right? Because now when your opponent goes to talk with them, the legislator is like, oh yeah, that's right. They told me that you were going to say this, but now I have a question to go back to you with. I can kind of probe a little bit deeper into what you're saying. Take notes. That's not always done, and follow up with a thank you note, a handwritten thank you note to the legislators, to them directly is very important. It's little things like that that make a difference. Talked about deadlines. Don't forget the governor. So these are all his people. The legislative secretary is the governor's direct report in the governor's office, who deals with legislation. That is Angie Way. You've got your agency and department heads around the issues that you are working on. The constitutional officers. All the ways to lobby the governor is to imagine who has his ear. Who does he listen to? Right, so you got to imagine his cabinet probably, hopefully he's listening to them because he appointed them to that position. The constitutional officers, because they have a political relationship, right? If you know the first partner, by all means, try to go talk to her. You want to work every angle that you can. You know, maybe your kid's teacher, her grandmother was a volunteer on Gavin Newsom's first mayoral run in San Francisco. Well, that's an angle to pursue. Leave no stone unturned. I am a community leader and I advocate for disabilities and social justice issues. Wonderful. And for me, I feel the idea is to be at the moment we have done the minimum. It's often yes, please reach out to me offline. Send me an email and we will talk for sure. Okay. I want to open it up for questions. Again, this is my website. If you want to stay in touch with me and again, learn about other events that I'm doing, I have been doing these webinars. I've been thinking a lot about whether I should just stream them live, and maybe that's an easier way for people to access them. I'm not sure. So I'm in the process of trying to figure that out, but I would love if you sign on to my mailing list. And then if you also follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter are the two platforms that I am most active on. So questions? All right, what should you say when you call if you are an affordable housing developer with a property in the official's district, but you personally don't live it? Say exactly what you said. I own a property in your district. It's still relevant to them. They absolutely still care because you are interacting with the district. You're impacting, especially around housing. Anything that can make life easier for his or her constituents, that's important to them. So yeah, 100%. What should you say when you call if you're, oh, same question, got it. Any other questions? And you certainly are welcome to email me separately. Bill fact sheets are so helpful, but they are not always available or easy to find. Yes, it is a very typical request to call the author of the bill and ask them to send you the fact sheet. If they don't have the fact sheet, then it's likely one doesn't exist. Or you can reach out to the sponsoring organization. They really should all have them and make them available. I agree. Sometimes it's not always easy to get. I would just make the request via email, so at least there's a record that you were looking. If you open the Legislative Advocacy Resources document, there's Leg Info is a fabulous free way to monitor legislation. It's not set up the easiest because honestly, if you want like a much more user-friendly, you're likely going to be spending some money for a tracker, but it is free. You can follow. So basically what it means is you go on there and you can see every piece of legislation that has been introduced, every amendment that has been made. You can create alerts so that if anything happens to a certain bill that you're following, you actually will get an email. So once it's referred to committee, once it's out of committee, if there's an amendment. So I actually encourage you to look for that Leg Info because it's a fabulous resource for advocates. Yes, it's on the advocacy handout. Yeah. Thank you. I'm sorry I can't see you guys. It's like I feel like maybe I'm just talking to myself. Okay. Oh, there we go. Gavin just posted the link to the handout. And you're welcome to get a copy of the, I don't know if it's in the conference Dropbox, but I think there should be a copy of the PowerPoint. All right. Anything else? Okay. Chris, do you have any parting words for us? Sorry, I didn't see the chat. I was waiting for you to talk. The recording, will this recording be available? Yes, is that correct? I don't know the answer to that. Okay, Chris says, all good, thanks, Christina. Awesome, it was my absolute pleasure to do this. I'm always inspired to empower people to be active in government because that's what it should be there for, and not for people who have money, who can hire rich and fancy lawyers and consultants to help them. That's not what this is about. And again, thank you. And it will be, okay, the recording will be available. Awesome. And Jasmine says you will receive an email notifying you when the recording is available. Perfect. Well, I hope that this was valuable and useful to you. And I thank you again for inviting me, and wish you all the best on your advocacy efforts.